You've all come to meet him today. I'm a mysterious guy. Your owners talk about me, but they really don't know me.
That would have been fun to do like a personification class and like have 2 couches and have a conversation with Roy. That would be great. I should remember that for next year.
That has to be a huge challenge. What about lunches?
I like that. Well, should we? Is everybody ready?
We ready?
Well,
All right.
let's do it.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for showing up on this Saturday morning, which I think is going to be a great presentation about achieving, measuring, presenting ROI, that's me, to your company. Actually, my name's David Hames, and I'm with the DBI committee, but who I want to introduce you to is Kelly Cohn of Clear Edge, a top company, and I'm not going to go through his resume. I'm going to let him do that. Thank you all for coming. This is going to be this great presentation.
All righty. Can you guys hear back there? We're good? Volume? Everybody's happy? Okay. Fantastic. So, yeah, Roy. We're going to talk about Roy today. As mentioned, I'm with Clear Edge. We're a company that does cool stuff with point clouds. We make them useful. You guys may have seen our little model that we put together of the laser scan of this facility. If you really want to do something meta, I think they may have gotten it loaded on the VR experience computers in the lab today, so you could virtually inhabit the building you're in right now. So, might be cool, might be weird. Maybe check it out. So yeah, please God don't read this. We're here to talk about who is Roy. Oh, that should probably be a question mark, right? You guys read the session description and stuff, otherwise you wouldn't be here, presumably. So instead, let's just dive right in and talk about where it all began. Kyle Bernhardt's not here this year, so I had to be the one to do unicorns in my slides. So, yeah, I had this really weird journey where I went to architecture school, thought I was going to be an amazing architect. I went to work at this firm. They were doing some pretty interesting stuff. And then, basically, I was the guy that didn't get the memo that when they asked, well, who wants to do the second Revit project, that you're supposed to step back because everybody else was going to. So I ended up doing this Revit stuff for the architecture side of the firm for a little while, and then somebody got this bright idea that we needed somebody to direct innovation, which is like impossible and just an oxymoron. And I had this, grand idea in my head that, now I'm the director of innovation. Now, money's going to rain down from the heavens. I can go buy cool stuff, and then I'm just going to implement technology across the firm. Everybody's going to be happy eating unicorn poop. And like ROI, Roy was not my friend. I did not like Roy at all, because Roy was this impossible thing, and if you guys don't know me, I'm a little OCD, and I may be under-exaggerating a little bit. And if I can't calculate it down to the penny, it's not real. I hate it. So I was super uncomfortable. It was as squishy as salsa, right? And I also had this fundamental problem with the way our firm was managed and run, and everything was documented. I mean, who here, let's do a quick show of hands just to wake everybody up. And TR, you don't have to raise your hand, just knock on the table, okay? All right. Who here works for an architecture firm? Excellent. All right, a lot of architects. Who here works for an engineering firm? You can raise your hand more than once if you're in an AE or something. Okay, excellent. All right, got lots of AEs. Construction. Fantastic. That's like the biggest construction representation we've had in a long time in one of these buildings. It's fantastic. All right, owner-operator. Woohoo! We got one! And then, let's see, who else am I missing out? No, apparently they're not important. No, actually, specialty consultants. Any specialty consultants? It was a joke. It was a joke. Please don't be offended. I love specialty consultants. They're wonderful. They suck all the life out of the job. Sorry, low blow. Yeah, how many people now in any firm, any business, how many people feel they actually do a good job tracking productivity? Right? Alrighty, so crickets. So yeah, we had that problem too. Basically, all of our architects were on salary. And so guess how many hours people booked every single week? Bodie. They might have worked 60, they might have worked 20, but they booked Bodie, right? So terrible metrics, right? How am I supposed to show productivity increases, right? And then we also have this interesting challenge. When you're implementing technology into a practice, into an architecture and engineering firm, something like that, you are, to a large extent, you are doing things that are 2 or 3 levels removed from where the dollars and cents actually exist for the firm, right? And so trying to track the impact you have on that, it's just challenging. We have this problem with things like Navisworks. How do you calculate cost avoidance? Well, I don't know how many clashes we didn't hit in the field because we did 3D coordination, right? And then again, it's also, I was an architect, and we're trained that numbers are evil, right? And so, we run into this problem. It's like, well, we have little signs of the problems in our industry. And sometimes the top part of the iceberg is calculable, relatively precisely even. But usually what's under the water, it's just kind of a crapshoot. So, number 2. Wow, my voice hasn't recovered fully from last night. Normally I do a better Dr. Evil impression. So, fundamentally, ROI is this measurement, right? It's the measurement of efficiency of investment. You guys can read. And if you talk to somebody who's like an economist, or you talk to somebody who comes out of business school and they're your CFO, they have very particular ideas of what ROI is. They're very precise, and you kind of have to push on those a little bit because what we do is inherently imprecise, right? So we'll talk about some of those strategies. But yeah, it's kind of this fundamental problem of, well, if you admit, how soft, squishy the numbers are, well, people are like, oh, well, you don't know what you're talking about then. But on the other hand, if you don't, they're like, this person's lying, right? So this is kind of what we struggle with. Yeah. What is the ROI of them? You don't know how long it took me to make a GIF with transparency.
John?
I should have asked John. He probably has one ready. All right. Yeah, so you guys have a good rest of your morning. That's it, right? No. Of course, the joke behind all this is that the technology itself, right? The technology itself Or should I just let you guys read? Is it more fun to do that?
How long did it take you to make this slide?
Actually, there's this beautiful animation option, like it's hidden in PowerPoint. When you grab text block and animate it, you can choose to animate it as a unit, by paragraph, or by letter. So that's like 10 seconds of clicking a couple buttons and bam, it looks like you're like typing it on your computer while you're talking. It's how I normally do my presentations because I make them up as I go. So ROI is not achieved by the existence of technology, right? And we all know that inherently, right? We don't go install Revit on somebody's computer and bam, right? We've got money flowing in. It's the application of that technology to an actual process you can sell. You have to be able to monetize it. You have to understand the process you're integrating into, what the impact the technology has on the process, and what is the business model by which that process is actually sold to the end user, to the customers, the clients, whoever you work with. And this is kind of a scary thing, because if you're a technology geek and you come into this as like the guy in your office, I love this quote from my class yesterday, the guy in the office who knows how to plug the HDMI cable in so the principal loves you. Like if you're that guy or gal, and you come, you're like, oh, I'm the technology person, yeah, I'm cool, I got long hair, woo, right? And then all of a sudden they're like, you need to understand how the business works. It's like, ooh, I'm out. Shit. But you do, because that's how you're going to understand ROI. You cannot understand ROI without understanding the fundamentals of the business that you're operating in. Can't be done. So let's talk about that. How many people here read books on business? Excellent. All right, so not all of you went to architecture school. Great. Or at least you reformed afterwards. You should read more books on business, because it's a great way to understand business, shocker. But one of the things that you'll be frustrated with is that most of the business books focus on companies that make products, which is really stinking annoying, because our business is different than that, right? So you have to take a lot of the things that are in these books with a big grain of salt. Go online and look at web resources on calculating ROI. The word product is listed bloody everywhere. Try and find one that says service. It's really hard. So there's not a lot of material that's really specific to our industry. You have to think about it, right? And we make money, typically, right, by delivering, technically we deliver a product, it's drawings, right, which is super depressing for all of us here. We do, but really the customer isn't buying our drawings, right, because the drawings are a necessary evil to the end of what our clients want, right, which is an actual stinking building. And none of us, unless we're a contractor, make buildings, right? And even the general contractor, they don't make buildings, they just manage other people that make buildings, unless they self-perform, right? So when you're doing this service, you have to deliver that service, you have to perform it for less money than you can get back. That's how you make a profit, in a nutshell. If it costs you more money to deliver that service than the customer's paying you, you're host, right? You gotta do it for less. So in a service industry, productivity, efficiency, that is how we gain small, short-term competitive advantages over our peers, or at least over the market, so that we can get a little more money, right? And as technologists, we are here to try and enable that to some extent. Now, that's a super generic high level. There's a lot of ways we can break that down, because profitability comes in many, many ways, right? The other way that we can think about things is risk, because service companies take on a risk. Most service companies have some kind of professional organization. If you're an architect, you stamp stuff so you can get sued. If you're an engineer, you stamp stuff so you can get sued. That's why. So if you can mitigate or minimize risk, there's value to your firm. right? Because risk comes in the form of lawsuits, and lawyers are stinking expensive. Ooh, any lawyers in the room? Too afraid to raise your hand? Check it. And service businesses, right, we grow, and this is another interesting thing different from products, right? We grow by getting new clients, by winning new clients in a limited market, so that probably means winning them away from other firms, while protecting and keeping our kind of clients close, right? Babying them, right? But it's interesting because it's unlike products, right? It's not necessarily a zero-sum game. If I sell you an iPhone, you're not going to also buy an Android unless you're really geeky, right? Or if you are forced to buy an iPhone by your company, but you're really an Android kind of person, and so your personal phone is an Android. But in our business, a lot of times our customers are working with several firms, right? Particularly large ones, right? They're going to be working with 10s, 20, lots and lots of firms. So it's not like they either buy your product and they don't, because they also will come back. You get repeat business over and over because it's a service, it's not a product. So it's just a fundamentally different kind of business, and you have to think about it that way. And then you have to think again about how can I impact that as a practice technologist? How can I, figure out how what I do impacts those three things, one way or another, right? So, unfortunately, these things are super duper 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 soft and squishy, right? And it gets softer and squishier the further you go down the slide. Oh, hold on, I gotta do my product placement. I have an arrangement with, actually, Coke bought them. It was really depressing. Yeah, the challenge is we play in a team sport. And part of the reason some of these things are so soft, right, is because how do you prove that you had that impact on winning that job versus something else, right? So it really gets terrifyingly, here's my iceberg again. I talked too much about that earlier, so we'll skip it. We just have to be really careful when we're calculating these things. And we have to understand the massive amount of uncertainty we're dealing with, and you have to get comfortable with it. More importantly, you have to get your firm comfortable with it. So there are, thankfully, some hard numbers. Unfortunately, they're all the ones that are negative. Right? We know how much the software costs. We know how much our people cost that are implementing the software. So it's really easy to rack up a hell of a negative tally quick, right? And this is part of the challenge of going into these firms and implementing things, because, what everybody sees at the gate is the negative dollar signs, right? I mean, right? And so you've got to be able to combat that, though. Otherwise, you risk becoming the guy that likes spending money, or the gal that likes spending all the company's money. It's like, oh gosh, that Kelly girl is always asking for so much money. Kelly's a guy. Oh, that happened actually at a meeting one time. I was in the room and they thought I wasn't. Which made it really fun. So yeah. And then we can start talking about the softer stuff, right? And this is the softness of your efficiency and productivity calculations, right, comes from how poorly your firm tracks it. If your firm is like data-driven and you've got wonderful metrics and people actually book real hours and they really put their time into jobs and they're not scared to death of the O word, overhead, and they actually track overhead time accurately, you are so freaking lucky, because that makes your job so much easier. If not, which I think, judging by the show of hands, we're all in that boat, you've got some real problems, right? And you really need to start thinking about how can I mitigate and manage those problems, and how can I prove some of these questions, right? Because these are the questions you should be asking yourself, and then you have to ask yourself, how can I measure that? Right? How can I measure what my impact, what this technology's impact is on productivity? I guarantee you it can be measured. Maybe not accurately, not with a laser scanner, but with a tape measure. Or, right, how many of y'all remember doing that from like school? Like, tell us how many feet it is from one side of the building to the other. Yeah. Only one person raised their hand, by the way. I'm gonna have to get more animated like Marcelo. It's gonna be great. Get you guys awake. So, softer, right? Savings. This is that iceberg, right? So you have to think, how do you calculate the underside of that iceberg? How do you make approximations, estimates to kind of figure that thing out so that you don't steer the Titanic smack into it, right? And then winning and keeping clients. And this one is, as we'll see later, this one is really stinking important. And it's important for a couple of, I'm not going to spill my own beans. It's important for a couple of reasons. We'll get to it. I did that earlier, so let's not do it again. I feel happy, oh so happy, right? It's really stinking expensive when an employee leaves your firm. Particularly if they're well-trained and they actually know what they're doing and they don't place in-place families in Revit, unlike the other 3/4 of your employees. You don't want them to go, right? So don't, again, just because it's soft and squishy, don't make light of it. These things have real meaningful value. Your HR department can probably tell you what it costs when an employee leaves in terms of recruiting to fill the position, interviewing those people, hiring them, training them, God forbid, paying a recruiting agency in this time of exceptionally tight job markets, right? There's real money there. So, yeah, it's a little squishy, but don't forget about it. Because you want to prove that, you're about to go to your firm and ask for millions of dollars of investment over the next couple of years to do something. You kind of want to show millions of dollars of impact, right? So, and again, understand the business you're in. It's scary. I told you I'd spilled my own beans. It's scary. It really is to think about this when you're coming from a technology, centric universe, and you like building your own computers and playing with Revit at 8 o'clock at night in the office when everybody else has gone home because you're trying to figure out how to make that family that rotates and doesn't break when you pass 360 degrees. And you should take Marcelo's class on that from like 5 years ago. It changed my life. Oh, there's the Dr. Pepper placement. The other thing you need to do is think a bit like a shrink, because you are actually participating in a giant psychology experiment when you are trying to implement technology. You have got to be able to put yourself in your end user's shoes, in your firm principal's shoes. And you have to think about these things because they're soft and squishy. There's so much uncertainty in what we do. You don't want to tie yourself down too tight, but you need to set some constraints on your performance and behavior and what you're going to accomplish for the firm. Otherwise, nobody wants to give you money. So it's this very delicate tightrope. In fact, it's probably more like a fortune teller. But you are basically in the business of convincing people to give you money on the speculative basis that you can have a financially impactful relationship with your firm. And it's not just your salary. It's a lot of other stuff that you're asking for. And you've got to think about this like a business. You've got to think about this in a very revenue, very profit, very cost-centric way, because ultimately the people that make the decisions about giving you money, most of them think that way, ultimately, because they're worried about making payroll for the entire company. Right? And so the solution to all of our problems in terms of squishiness is baselining. So is anybody familiar with the term? Has anybody spent some time trying to build baselines for their firms? Oh, All right, is this because we're asleep or? Okay, all right. Let's try this one more time. This is actually an important question. How many of you have spent time building baselines for your firm's performance? Okay, we got, I feel a little better. So, because we have such bad data and such bad metrics in this industry, generally speaking, about the only thing you can do is build up baselines from past projects. So you have to rely on the data you have, crappy as it may be, and you need to basically build a performance profile of a typical project. You could look back at the last 10 years of work, and I'm going to use examples that probably aren't super relevant, well, to now, but they were super relevant, before. Hopefully you can all relate. Implementing Revit, right? How many people in this room are using Revit or ArchiCAD? Fantastic. How many of you are using AutoCAD as your primary production platform? I can die and go to heaven. I have never had a room where there wasn't at least one person that raised their hand to that question. Robert, it's happened. That is awesome. All right, so then you've all had this lovely experience, right? You're trying to get in here and implement Revit. You can look at the prior 10 years of CAD performance and do metrics like how many people per million square feet, how many people does it take to do 1 million square feet of work? Yeah, it's a shit metric and it varies by market sector dramatically, but it's a baseline, right? Break it up by market sector if you're OCD like me, right? How many people per million square feet of healthcare? How many people per million square feet of this, blah, 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 whatever. Pick a number. Find something in your data that you guys can get behind and be like, here's a metric. And then start measuring it on your BIM projects, right? The beauty of it is, even if you haven't already started, you can go back and do it. Because the data's there. So, go back to your firms after this week. Holy crap. Now, wait a minute. Is this you raising your hand or
No, seriously.
praise Jesus?
No, it's not praise.
Okay.
But so I tried to do this at my previous firm, and because the accountants were saying we're actually going the wrong direction, right? We're spending more hours on projects than we should. Not based on what we were doing, like it wasn't like you screwed it up, but just what's going on, productivity's going the wrong direction. But there's so many factors. There are so many, because we also went through a huge hiring push, and there was no, oh, do they have any who cares? They're architects, bring them in. There was no, hey, do they know how to use it? No, we don't care, bring them in. They're designers. And they were like, why is productivity going down? Well, there's about 1 million reasons why.
This is why I have that slide up about think like a shrink. Because you've got to preface these things. You've got to think about like, I'll say hours may not be the best metric.
Oh yeah.
And this is why what we chose was people per project, and then we ranked the size of a project, and then we came up with a people per size of project metric, because we were also in the midst of a push to start tracking hours accurately, and hours were going way up, right?
Yeah.
And we were also in a push of trying to get people to track their overhead accurately, because before it just never got entered, because we didn't want to be that person, right? Got a question back here.
More of a comment kind of to add on to that. The previous firm went through this, we had a new COO started, and she went through and just did a discovery session on everything. And there was when they sort of pull these metrics, like you said, no matter how crappy it is, pull them up. And they were able to go through all of our systems, all of our billing and project performance, no matter how bad it looked. There's not a discovery. For example, one project, it was like a one-year project, and maybe 20 people should have worked on it. There was over 150 people that had built time to it. And they're like, so she starts to pull out these numbers and metrics. They kind of changed
Well, and there's, you know, the beauty of it is, in that case, you did two things that I'll bring up at some point, so I will spill my own beans right now. First is, you got a new COO, somebody that understood fundamentally the numbers or wanted to, and you enlisted them to help you. Which, I mean, at least when I started out, like the COO I felt was my arch enemy because that was the guy that didn't want to give me money, right? And then what I kind of realized towards the end of my tenure at Beck was that, no, that guy's my best friend because he's also in a role where he's in an overhead department and he's trying to justify his existence. And I can help him do that. And so don't just look at, you know, oh God, it's the CFO or they don't want to talk about technology. Well, no, they don't want to talk about technology, but they love talking about business. So go to them, talk about business, enlist their help, and they will help you figure out the numbers, figure out what metric works, see if you can get them on your side. And because trust me, financials are like black magic. Having done projections and all this, other budgeting stuff for an 18-people group at a billion-dollar company, it is so much bullshit. So they're just as used to dealing with soft numbers. They like to pretend the numbers are all hard in dollars and cents, but they're not. They can really help you prove a case out and find a metric that works better for you. And then the other thing is dig in. I mean, our first Revit project, it shit the bed. I mean, it was awful. We did a 40,000 square foot movie theater that we would normally produce with 2 people using AutoCAD in 3 weeks. We had 14 people working on that job off and on, and it took us 3 months. How do you think the financials looked on that? I'm still whistling, you just can't hear it. So it was bad. And they pulled us in, literally, to the office, and I made a joke about it earlier, about how I got started and all this stuff. They pulled us into this meeting room, and they're like, well, we're probably never going to do another Revit project. And they were like, well, why did this go so bad, blah, blah, blah. And the real story is that, I don't know, I was an idiot, and I didn't think about, the principal in charge of this project is sitting here in the room right next to me. And I said, well, maybe it's because we put 14 people on a project with a new technology that nobody's ever learned, and the only people on the project for more than 1 week was me and one other guy. Kind of sounds like an operations problem, not a technology problem. Fortunately, Rick was very understanding and supportive, and I didn't get fired. But, you've got to, metrics don't always work in your favor. And if you do a good job of enlisting other people to help you with them, they'll be there in your court to help you explain why, which is always good to not be the one explaining your own failure, right? Or perceived failure. And then the other thing is you really do want to find metrics that will trend well, right? Just like all economists and all CFOs, they look for the metrics that trend well. Those are the ones they put in the top of their report, right? Because it's all about psychology. And then, so here's the enlist other people, right? If you come up with the number, you look biased because you want to do this, right? So if you're trying to implement Navisworks, right, what I did was I found the gnarliest, crustiest, most skeptical senior superintendent in the entire company. And I tracked him down. I said, Frank, how much does it cost every time we have a coordination conflict out in the field? Will Kelly? I don't know, but it sure chaps my hide. Frank, can you give me a number? Well, by the time you get me and the junior superintendents and the foremen and the engineers and you submit an RFI and you wait 6 weeks, even though the contract says 3, and you get an answer and, I don't know, $5,000. I'm like, okay, I now have Frank Land on tape saying a clash says it costs $5,000.
Unbeknownst to Frank.
Right? So what number do you think I put in my ROI calc? Do you think I put $5,000? What do you think I put? 2. I put 2. Because that's a soft number. I put 2. And the math still works. Right? So the beauty of that is I didn't come up with the number. A guy who has way the hell more experience than me and trust within the company gave a number that's more than twice as high as the number I'm putting down in trumpeting. That's pretty stinking believable, right? And so that's, look for these opportunities to enlist the, the crusty or the wonderful project manager that everybody looks up to because he's so good and his projects always come in, with a higher profit margin than projected. Find that guy and ask him, how many people does it take to do the job? Or, how many hours do you think your team really works producing this job? Help them, again, get them to help you come up with that baseline. And then it's no longer your credibility that you're relying on in proving out your business case. It's actually somebody who has a real relationship to the dollars and cents of the company, has a ton of respect. And now they're your ally, whether they like it or not. Because now you're out giving presentations to the company talking about how Frank said 5K, right? And now Frank's like, yeah, that's right. He's underestimating. It's like, yes, right? Think like a shrink. There is no I in team. Yes, there is. It's in the a-hole. Hey, look, it's an a-hole. No. Sorry, had to go there. Imagine you're in your, I should check my time. All right. Imagine you are sitting in a leadership meeting at your company talking about how many projects your BIM stuff helped your company win. What is everyone else in that room thinking? The marketing guy is sitting there going, I'd have won that job without it, right? The BD guy is going, we won that job because I've known that guy and played golf with him for 10 years. The principal's going, we won that job because we did a kick-ass design last year and he loved it. We all know that's a lie, but, right? I mean, everybody in the room is the hero in their own story, right? We're just as guilty of that. Everyone wants to be the hero in their own story, right? So everybody thinks they're the main reason that job got won. So you have to be super duper careful when you're trying to take credit for winning work. So again, use that trick from the slide before. Go to the marketing guy and ask him to give you an approximation of how many jobs it's helped you win. And you may not like the number, but he'll feel compelled to put something down because he feels bad for you, right? Ask your BD lady, like, hey, I know you've known these guys, played golf with them for years, but they did have BIM requirements, and we were the only firm that checked off all the boxes, right? So, what would you say we contributed to the win on that job? 10%. Hey, if it's a $50 million job, 10% ain't bad, right? Take the win. But again, engage them. Get them to give you those numbers so that when you're sitting in that room and you're presenting it, everybody's just nodding their head and agreeing with you. And you're like, yeah, that's fair. Yeah, they contributed, $15 million to the top line last year. Yay! Right? I mean, take advantage of these things. Psychology is a wonderful tool. People want to help you. They do. It's the weirdest thing. I don't know why. Some people give classes. It's strange. It takes time. So yeah, let's take take some real world examples. So you'll notice none of these things are technology, right? You remember the slide, the ball of nothing burned, right? It's design and documentation, scheduling, coordination, project collaboration, multidisciplinary support. Those are the things we're doing. We're not doing Revit, we're not doing BIM. We're impacting process, right? So one of the things I'm a big believer of, and we won't really go into this class unless we get through stuff really quickly, is making implementation plans. So if you're doing a project, you make a project plan. Well, as a design technologist or a construction technologist, this is our project. You ought to have a plan. You ought to have a schedule. You ought to have staffing projections. You ought to have cost projections. You ought to have, well, profitability projections, right? Like, you should have all of these things, because again, that's the language the people who run your firm speak. So you should do it. You should look like a professional. You shouldn't go out and half-ass an implementation on the fly, like I did this presentation. No, actually, this presentation terrified me, not as much as the gala dinner, but it terrified me, so I spent a lot of time on this one. So, set some goals. So we wanted to knock off 20% of our staff per project. We wanted to take that metric, people per million square feet, cut it by 20%. Hey, it's an ambitious goal, let's try it, right? Because we all know if there's 5 architects on a project, they will work 60 hours a week even if they don't need to, because they have no concept of work-life balance, or on the positive view of it, they love their job, right? Or some combination thereof, right? So if you put 5 people on a project, they will use all their time. But if you put 4 people on a project, they will use all their time. But the 5th guy's not there. He's on another job, right? So that was our goal. That's why we were doing man year, right? We were operating much higher level than hourly, because I knew hourly was too noisy, right? We wanted to do some quality of life stuff. We wanted to take a lot of the kind of non-value adding tasks, because how many people here went to school to manage drawings? No one? Awesome. Neither did I. How about, let's try and get rid of all the wonderful errors we had between our structural engineers and the architects. Not totally, though, that's unrealistic. So 50%. Because we actually had some metrics on that. I don't know why or how, but we actually had some real metrics on, I think a year or 2 before I started, one of the principals got on this kick about how some of our consultants were better than other consultants, and he wanted to know, and so we were tracking this. It was like, gold mine! Awesome! A number! Reduced design errors and emissions by 25%. Now that's squishy. But one of the principals really wanted that, so I said, okay. And then we wanted to provide some automated QA/QC, because we sucked at it.
How did you track design errors and emissions?
In all honesty, I just asked the principals how we were doing. Because there's no effing way you can track that. If you figure it out, you're a genius, please tell me, right? But I couldn't figure it out. But it was an important metric, they wanted it, and so we just kind of had this agreement that every 6 months I'll ask you how we're doing and you'll tell me. And because you are the gods, your numbers are true, right? I mean, it's their numbers, I'm just putting in a report. Who cares? Hey, I didn't say I had all the answers. And then risk, working to lower our E&O costs. So we actually had some real goals to lower our E&O costs, because we were a design build company and we felt we were paying a higher E&O premium than other firms were that were not design build firms. And so we wanted to try and cut those costs down. Chart. Oh, I need to go back over here. I'm going to use my pen. It's fine. All right. So then, because I am actually a geek, or nerd, or both, I had a huge Excel spreadsheet that I used to track all this stuff. And in the class materials, there is a much cut down and simplified version that is let's say, it's a bit obfuscated to protect the guilty. So you can't really track anything back to the company, numbers are averaged out, blah, 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 blah. They wouldn't let me share the actual spreadsheet because it's dirty. Don't worry, so are all of yours. So this is looking at a couple of different fun things. Track over here, I keep walking away. So it's tiny. Can I do this? Oh, it's gonna make me draw. Oh no, I can do it like this. I'm playing with these features now. I've never really had fun like this before. So we're looking at a couple different numbers here. Revenue at cost, revenue at profit, hardware cost, software cost, P&L, right? So this is basically looking at month to month. And cumulatively, you'll notice the numbers are different. This one's not cumulative, this next one I jumped ahead, sorry. This is looking at basically our P&L for the BIM department, right? Month to month, zoom out now. Month to month, right? Okay. So you'll see that early on, go back to my pen. All right. See that early on, oh, come on, don't do this to me. I practiced this beforehand, it works so much smoother. You'll see that early on, costs were a little bit bigger. So above the line is yay, below the line is right? If we look at these costs, what seems to be the largest one? The darkest one, the one that's closest to the top, and this is a cumulative graph, right? So the darkest one that's closest to the top, that's software and hardware costs. So here, I mean, the projector does not have quite as good color rendition as my monitor apparently. So this line, that's hardware and software costs. This slightly darker, the slightly lighter orange line, personnel. You are the most expensive thing in almost any implementation. There are exceptions. But you are generally the most expensive thing, your staffing. This is why it's so hard to get additional staff to help out with your distribution of Revit geniushood within your firm, right? And then see that lovely little blip that looks super duper scary? This guy. How many of you guys know Aaron Maller? That's Aaron. That was Aaron leaving Beck. That blip right there is the cost associated with finding a replacement for the man, the myth, the legend. Right? It was freaking expensive. All right? And it had a pretty negative impact on our P&L for that period of time. And then the lines that you guys see drawn as opposed to the color fills, the lines, those are aggregate numbers, right, that we're looking at there. You guys can dissect these things later if you're really kinky and nerdy like me. But this kind of gives you a sense of where you're getting benefits and where your costs are coming from. So the other thing I want to point out is this little hump right there. Now what you guys probably can't read is that both the green line, well, let me phrase, let's focus on the green fill. That green fill is contribution to net revenue. That's project winnings, right? You'll notice it peaks early and fades out fast. That's because as everybody else starts implementing Revit, it stops winning you work. So this is why it's really, really important, and this is a great, by the way, this is a fantastic freaking argument to make at your firm. Why is it important to adopt technology early? Because a huge amount of the positive benefit of adopting a process technology only comes to those who adopt early. Because if you start your Revit implementation here, you ain't winning shit. Because everybody else has got it. So, If you're frustrated that your firm waits too long to adopt technology, throw some of that in front of them. You're like, guess what? We missed out on the early swing of winning jobs because we were using BIM. That's a lot of money right there of ROI that was not captured if you waited too long. Now, you'll notice the numbers go up to 2020. I left in 2016. You'll notice that there's a big jump after I left. That's not because I was expensive and left and then all of a sudden things made more money. That was because this projection was something put together with the principals of the firm back in like 2013 or 2012. And reality did not shape out quite as we would like. And basically what happens in 2016 when I leave is, well, I don't get the inside information anymore, so I can't update the chart to real numbers. So everything after 16 is projection, right? So pretend this chart came from 2016 because it did. And most likely those projections are a little too optimistic, right? Because they weren't tracking that way. Now, one could argue that if we did some really badass stuff with Dynamo, or if we were an early adopter in VR, because remember, this is not a chart of Revit. This is a chart of a design and documentation technology implementation, right? So if we did some really cool stuff with VR early on that really got engagement from our customers, and our marketing and BD people were like, oh my gosh, you guys are helping us out win projects again. Yay! Well, then maybe that's not a optimistic. But I don't know, I'm not there. I can't speak, right? And this one's my favorite. God, I wish this projector was brighter. I'll draw some lines for you guys. So again, there's Aaron.
Wow.
And what these lines are, and probably the thing to think about is just cumulative ROI. So look at the dark lines because those are the ones you can actually see on the projector. Red is, not surprisingly, cumulative costs over time with revenue. All right, so when I say revenue in this case, what I mean is actual billings the BIM team received as a result of their work. So if they were able to bill time to a job, if they were able to bill time to a customer, if they were able to provide a service and earn actual physical revenue as a BIM team or as a design technology team for the company. So, yeah. The light colored lines, those relate back to the prior one. Those are basically month by month. What was the P versus the L? Where were we? We're in the red, were we in the green? The dark lines are cumulative over the entire point of time we're tracking. That's why the numbers on the left are millions of dollars and the numbers on the right are tens of thousands of dollars, right? So the dark colored lines reads the left. So, gosh, I should have made these things bigger. So it looks like just looking at cumulative with revenue, that number is $3.5 million. So over the, gosh, when did it start, 2005 something? Over the 15-year swing this chart documents, my team spent $3.5 million of the company's money doing a design and documentation implementation. You guys are freaking expensive. All right? You're asking for a lot of money. Don't kid yourselves and think, oh, it's just $30,000 for more licenses. And next year, and next year, and oh, we need to hire a new support specialist, and oh, these are the things your principals are thinking, right? And this is why you need the other lines. So my other line that I really like is this one. So I'm going to erase that because I don't draw that accurately. The orange line. That one is cumulative costs, revenue, and savings. Yes, savings. And savings. So going back to our squishy math, that little line right there is the measured savings that we had producing drawings based on that metric. manpower per square foot. And we were able to document and track that. And you'll notice there's a dip at first. And that's because, not surprisingly, when we first started tracking it, we were implementing a new technology that nobody knows. Productivity went. Right? Not good. Farva beans, Chianti, I was worried. But the good news is, we saw after about 2 or 3 years at the scale of the firm, once we had reached kind of full implementation, we were completely off CAD, blah, 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 we actually saw that number come up, pass, and start earning us real value back. And we ended up pretty well spot on hitting that 20% reduction in manpower numbers. I mean, we stayed on it. And the beauty of that is that gave me a pretty constant curve up. And so, oh yeah, I forgot the numbers. There's an order of magnitude, so it's easy. That says 25,000, which means cumulatively it was 2.5 million. So that's a $2.5 million net return on investment. Just looking at savings, which was a metric I was told to use, I was given and was bought into by the company. Well, hey, we paid for ourselves. Now, the other fun one's looking at the yellow line. So the yellow line tosses out savings and says, we don't care. And that one is just cumulative with revenue and wins. What do we see? We look good early. But after that initial rush of them project wins rushes off, it ain't enough to keep you net positive. You gotta achieve those savings. The good news is, and again, the good news is, if you adopt early enough to get that initial rush, hopefully the net impact to revenue from projects you win offsets the net decrease in productivity from implementing a new technology and people having a learning curve. So these things can be very complementary. And so the green line is both of those impacts together. So that's all in. Are these numbers squishy? Did I ever look a principal in the eye and say, I earned you $6.5 million over the group? Fudge, no. But I sure as hell showed him this graph. Because they're the ones that came up with the metrics. I just recorded them and reported them. And that's the power of what you can do if you get that buy-in on what metrics, right? That's their number, it's not my number. And so this is the actual ROI. So if you tell a CFO that that last chart was ROI, he'll be like, no, it's not. ROI is a ratio. All right, so here we go. Here's our ratio. So 0, bad, right? 1, good, but not great. Here's 0. Here's 1. And does anybody know what the blue line is? The blue line is what would happen if I took every month the same amount of money I spent on our design documentation implementation and instead put it into the stock market with a 5% ARR. Now, if you really want to be geeky, you could like track the S&P 500 or the Dow Jones or something and take its ARR year to year and it would look much more wibbly wobbly. I'm not that geeky. That's why I'm not the CFO. But that's what you would get putting money in the stock market, which is an excellent way to cut the legs off the idiot in the room that goes, we should just put this money in the stock market. He's there. Someone's thinking it if they don't say it. No, it's not. Right? I mean, and there again, you see that yellow and that orange line crossing each other. Where do they cross? So right about at the same point. That's totally coincident and meaningless. I just wanted to point it out because it's fun. Not all things are causal, right? Some things are coincidence. Now, we also did scheduling. My team handled scheduling for the entire company. Centralized scheduling for $1 billion construction firm. Still not sure how that happened. Somebody must have been drunk one morning and agreed to it. But this was one we were starting to build up tracking on, and then the one metric that we had started tracking internally, which was the actual times we had submitted, our team found a mistake and submitted money to the client for a change order, and the amount of money we got back. We hit 6 million in 2015 and 5 million in 2016, so that was like orders of magnitude larger than the cost, and so we were just kind of like, I'm not charting that, it's too much work, right? So I don't have any charge for that, unfortunately. Should I take the stairs or should I walk up or hop? We'll do the stairs. But again, control risk on schedule related stuff, right? None of these things are by synchro, right? Check our contract terms. That's a really sexy them thing to do. Contracts. Document delays and win extensions. And of course, then we built, this was our expense, our plaything, we built our own little app to basically track schedules across multiple projects and trend them, and then provide data back to projects if any of them did something out of trend, so that hopefully we wouldn't put a bad schedule out in the first place. So that's pretty fun. Coordination. So I know we had some contractors in the room. Do you guys have any concept of your ROI for 3D coordination? You have homework. This is easy to document. I mean, okay, it's not easy. It's not really hard. It's much easier than running a coordination meeting. It just takes a little bit of time, right? Get some goals, get some metrics, you know, people will be so happy you're asking those questions, and then, you know, then you play with the numbers until it looks good, and then you show it to people. Does this chart look in any way familiar? What do we see again? Big early hump. We were a little later to Navisworks, to 3D coordination than we were to them, but we were in a region that was behind. Our biggest region was a region that was just behind. So we got lucky. We got really lucky. And you'll see that there is no second hump on this. We just didn't see any potential for 3D coordination helping us to win work because it's just been so broadly distributed. And the things that we could sophisticatedly point out are better about our process, our clients don't understand. So don't count on it, right? But we did get that early hump. And then, you know, gosh, this is what I get for playing too much time on my computer. The dark blue line is, of course, revenue at profit. So one of the nice things about coordination, unlike them, is we were able to actually get substantial revenue. We were able to get coordination paid for a lot because we built it into our contracts carefully. So a good chunk of the cost of the department was being paid for, right? Yay. By our clients, not by overhead, which is always a win. If you can achieve that, that is a huge win. And then the light blue line, or the light blue fill up here, that is revenue from reimbursements. Reimbursements are sexy. That's what happens when your company builds in a percentage into every single project and charges that project, and that money goes in and feeds your department like drugs. It's freaking fantastic. That is the crack cocaine of implementation ROI. It is supposedly amazing. So let's look at our cumulative numbers. So again, big early hump, you can see that in the fact it goes off the charts. I had a particularly, we had a particularly large project where the owner literally told us we were picked because of what we showed this owner on 3D coordination. I was freaking ecstatic. Because owner
Yeah.
said it. So I walked into that room and said, well, we got a project win. Here's what the owner said in an email to the CEO. I'm counting all of this one. It was a good one. Yeah, you can see we've got our same kind of early hump with our yellow line here, right? That's the cumulative with revenue and wins, and then it tails off. The good news is you'll see this one never drops below the line, because remember on this one, people were billing time to projects. So a good chunk of our people's time were covered. It was one that cost on our overhead department, right? Orange line, that's savings, so there's your iceberg, right? How much did a clash cost? $2,000. How many clashes did we find? Well, this one curves up because the company was actually growing pretty rapidly, right? So it's not a nice straight line. Well, why would I say nice? It's better than a straight line, but it's because volume was growing, right? So therefore project volume was growing, clashes were growing, blah, blah, blah. And our green line, right, that's our really good line. And so this one, this implementation by our metrics, right, would have topped out just under $7 million of net ROI. Well, again, of net cumulative benefit. Oh, man, I didn't do the chart for that one. I added that in like last week because I showed this to somebody at my current firm who is a CFO, and they literally said, that's not ROI, Kelly. It's the ratio. I did one. So, let's see, how are we on time? When does this thing end? Later today. I didn't mean the conference TR.
7 minutes.
7 minutes, crap. All right, that's awesome. Oh man, I gave that one away. We'll just go to it. So, yeah. You don't want to be the BIM unicorn that spends all the money. You want to be the cat, right? If Tim Waldock was here, he would appreciate that a great deal. He is the Revit cat. But yeah, so let's take some questions, if we have any. Questions?
In your process, have you ever taken post-mortem feedback from potential clients after interviews, where they might actually be kind enough to tell you why you got the job or didn't? And then you can actually assign relative weight and value to the technologies you implemented and showed in your interviews.
So actually, yes, that we had a postmortem for both wins and losses that our BD person, our BD team did. So whenever we won or lost a job, they did an interview, basically, with the client and asked those questions. I was unsuccessful in getting a technology-specific question on that list of questions because they were uncomfortable adding it, because there were already like 10 questions, and they didn't want to go over 10 because 10 is a magic number, and 11 is evil. And they didn't want to stop asking any of the other questions, because we had that data back over like 15 years, same 10 questions. So we relied instead upon just polling. We did almost the same thing. We would do a postmortem of the BD and marketing people and ask them, how much do you think we contributed? Because they might disagree with the client, you know? But no, that's a great suggestion if you can get that, because no one can really argue with the client, right? So that's why in Navisworks, when I had that huge spike, because the client was just like effusive, I was like, fuck yeah.
You showed that 4 people could be asked to put that plus 5 people. Was that also just feedback from principals, or was that something you maybe compared to similar projects and then
Yeah, so we baseline that metric by looking at the last 10 years of CAD jobs, and we actually did it by market sector. And so we just had, over the last 10 years, we had a rough calculation of how many people per million square feet of work designed for healthcare, for retail, for entertainment, etc. And then literally we just tracked that as we implemented them. It's a very rough metric. And then the flip side of that was then we were actively engaged with the project management staff, trying to get them to staff jobs lower. So we would get a team really trained up, and then when a project manager, when we were starting a new job and they were set to get a really good Vim team, we pulled every string we could to knock 20% off what that job actually got staffed with. And as people got more and more comfortable with the tool, and as people got more and more capable of doing the work, they started listening. And so projects started just getting staffed with less people, just factually. And not surprisingly, the project gets what it's staffed with. And then those people pour in their hours, and then voila. So I mean, it wasn't like it magically happened. I mean, there was a lot of engagement and feedback back and forth, talking to project managers, getting them comfortable with it, blah, blah, blah. But again, the project managers actually came up with that number. So that was the rug I could pull out from under their feet. I'd be like, guys, you said you think we can do this. Well, Chris, actually, the second coming of project managers in our firm, Chris said we could do that because he had a job where he did it. The second Reddit job was not as bad as our first one. In fact, it was opposite. It was one of the most profitable jobs the company had ever had because we did it right. And so that job set the benchmark for the rest of the jobs. So, yeah. I think there was a question over here. Somebody had a hand up first, or maybe it was the same one. All right. Oh, goodness. 3 at a time. You can ask me anytime. I'll get you.
I just have a question. How would you do an ROI if the company is like not really want to move to Veeam or using Revit? Where would you get your number?
So if the company doesn't really want to make the change, I would look for those hidden friends. So I actually had a great conversation after the panel yesterday with a guy who just came in as a CFO at a design firm, and he's a new CFO, and they have not implemented them. And he's trying to figure out that the company, it's an old school, we've got guys hand drafting, yada, yada, yada. He wants to be more relevant. He wants to help the company improve their margins. That's how he looks good and keeps his job. You can help. So look for those kind of hidden people that you can kind of enlist to your side. They'll help you get the numbers. They'll help you pull this stuff together. Surprisingly, people in the risk department at a company, at a construction company, the risk managers can be great friends, right? I mean, they can do so many things for you. They'll get you plugged into contracts. They'll do all this other stuff that you don't want to do, right? But you got to get them on board. But yeah, it can be a slog. But if you show it to them as a business case, they'll be a lot more interested in implementing than they would be if you just talk about it as technology. And then by the way, we're definitely, 1 minute left. All right.
My question goes to what you start talking about, measuring how many people per project you're looking at. When you were talking about how hours weren't a very good metric, why is hours per person or hours per sheet? The argument that I get is that takes on.
So my first reaction is you are trying to measure at such a granular level, and you will want to die if you try to measure at that level. It will hurt. It wasn't a good metric for our firm. Almost all of our work was lump sum. All of our people were on salary. So we didn't have accurate hourly information. There was no way to get it. I could not make an hourly baseline that would be, it could have been 30% off. And we were also in the midst of shifting to actually tracking hours better, because I've been screaming about how I can't do ROI because we don't track hours, and beating the principals up at every after-hour meeting and taking them out to drinks and blah, blah, blah. And they'd finally listen. So the numbers were totally different. So it's like hours were burned, totally burned. And realistically, we didn't actually project projects using man hours. We, as a firm, our project, and this is actually a great tip, find your firm's project projection sheet, the sheet they use to calculate how much the fee will cost the client. Find that sheet. Because there will be a metric on that sheet you can use. Because those are the metrics they care about. Those are the metrics they use to figure out what a job is going to cost and set a fee when they're bidding work. Your best metrics will be on that sheet. And for us, it was basically a number of people. They would pick how many people they think needed to do the job, calc the fee, right? And that staff would change. You get more people in CD, less people during, SD, blah, 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 right? But that gave me some really good numbers. So find that sheet. I bet you money, unless you're a firm that does hourly work. Like if your firm works for the government and everything is hourly, hours are a great metric because you have them, because they matter. At our firm, hours didn't matter. So it was a terrible metric. All right. Thank you all so very much. Please fill out the session survey. Go get some coffee or a Bloody Mary, depending on how hungover you feel. And yeah, I'll be at, well, I probably won't be at the booth because I need to go prep for the gala dinner and I'm terrified.